Our theme for this year is prevention. We opened the season this fall with a presentation by Nancy Poole, who challenged us to think about what we know about prevention and whether we're actually doing it. Today is our final presentation for this year's FASD Learning Series. Charlene Hellson, who's with Alberta Health Services, will discuss the role of historical trauma as an underlying cause of addiction and FASD in the Aboriginal community, as well as familial and cultural practices that can mitigate trauma's effects. Before I introduce Charlene, here's a few housekeeping tips. You can ask questions during the presentation by using the question and answer module on the right-hand side of your screen. A session facilitator is monitoring the questions and will pose them at suitable times during the presentation. If we aren't able to answer all the questions during the live presentation, we'll answer them via email after the session is over. It's important that you include your email address when you ask a question, otherwise we'll have no way to send you an answer. The presenter's contact information can be found on the final slide of the presentation. In order to receive your certificate of attendance, you must have signed in after 8:50 a.m. Evaluations for this session will be emailed to you after the session. Please fill them out and return them. We rely on your feedback to continually improve what we do and how we do it. Today's presentation and handouts will be posted for viewing and downloading on the FASD Alberta website, fasd.alberta.ca. If you experience any technical issues, please email support@cmgcanada, one word, Charlie Mike Golf, Canada.ca. Also, please let your local tech support know, as the problem may originate at your end. As Alberta advances with the FASD 10-year strategic plan, education and training continue to play a key role. This is our 5th year of offering sessions and our 2nd year of delivering the material as webinars. As always, all sessions are taped and made available on the CMC website, fasd.alberta.ca. We are pleased with the ongoing interest and attendance in this initiative. We appreciate the work of CASA, Child, Adolescent and Family Mental Health, and the Alberta Centre for Child, Family and Community Research in making this initiative a success. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Charlene Hellson. Charlene is the Mental Health Coordinator for the Aboriginal Health Program with Alberta Health Services. Her background includes experience in providing mental health services to Aboriginal people, both as a clinician and administrator. After graduating from the Department of Psychology at the University of Calgary, Charlene began a double life as a performer and helper for over 10 years now. Recently, she has integrated the two into unique learning experiences to promote understanding and dialogue, such as Unpacking the Backpack, a one-woman show which portrays the contemporary lived experience of historical trauma. Charlene hopes to impart the historical and social reality of Aboriginal people in ways that are not blaming and shaming, but to help create understanding and better relations. She truly believes in potency of the arts as a transformational experience. So please join me in welcoming Charlene.
Thank you. Sometimes you hear speakers say, "Thank you for that warm introduction," and then it's funny because we write our own bios. Thank you for that flattering introduction. But I am very pleased to be here today. Thank you everyone for being here, and I am sorry about the delay, but I will make up for it. I'm going to present to you something that perhaps you may not have seen before. It's a unique learning opportunity using theater as a way to transmit understanding about the Aboriginal population and the reasons why we have a health disparity, mental health disparity, and overrepresented in areas where we wish not to be. And I have hope for the future that this will improve. But in the meantime, it's important to understand the roots of this disparity. So I've created a one-woman show called Unpacking the Backpack. I created it in response to a request while I was on a committee that was planning a conference on mental health and diversity. One day was dedicated to multiculturalism, and the next day was dedicated to Aboriginal mental health. So I'm going to, and before I explain too much about it, I'm just going to present this to you Afterwards, I'm going to lead you through a bit of a debrief. So just be prepared for that. The piece is emotionally provocative, so please take care of your heart during the presentation, but I promise it is not graphic and it won't secondarily traumatize you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around, and when I turn back around, I'm going to be in character. This character is an Aboriginal person. Could be a man, could be a woman, could be Cree, could be Blackfoot, but she happens to be Blackfoot, and she's going to tell her story to you. All right? So she's presenting to you like you're the helper, you're the clinician, the police officer, the judge, the nurse. So please stay with me, and I will present to you Unpacking the Backpack. Hi. Yeah, I guess you can call me Aboriginal. But if you want to be more specific, I'm First Nations. I still hear some of us saying Native. And believe it or not, there are those of us that prefer Indian. I know it's confusing. It's confusing for us too. We're the ones being labeled. But let me put it simply. When I was a little girl, my grandpa told me that I belonged to Nitsitapi. That's Blackfoot, for real people. So that's what I am, and that's what you can call me, a real person. How am I today? Oh, not so good. It's this backpack. It's so heavy, it hurts. I think it's starting to give me chest pains. Just out of nowhere, I'll get this burning feeling here. And my stomach twists into knots, and I feel like I can't breathe. My hands go numb, I get dizzy, and I feel like something really bad is gonna happen. Someone's gonna die. I'm gonna die. Oh, that's so embarrassing. What am I hoping for? Well, I'm hoping to unpack this backpack. I've been carrying it around for so long, I don't even remember what's in there anymore. So before you start asking all those questions that you need to ask, I need to get this off my back. But I need your help. All you have to do is listen, and maybe you might get some answers to your questions. Oh, it's so heavy. Oh, I did try to get help with this before. About a year ago, I was in really bad shape. So I went to get help. I went to the hospital. I was hoping for some relief from my overwhelming despair. But instead, the doctor asked me to spell world backwards. Just at that moment, I remembered my grandma's story about learning to spell in residential school when she was only 5 years old and still learning English. A nun stood over her with a ruler as she tried to spell a word she didn't even understand. My poor grandma, homesick and anxious, she moved the chalk on board, creating lines under duress until the nun whacked her little fingers, and then she couldn't spell at all. What I wanted to say that day was, my world is backwards, and that's why I need help. Help to turn my world around so I can move forward. But if I have to spell it out, I will. World, backwards. D, disease, death, L, loss, lament. R, rage and remorse. O, oppression, obituary. W, why? Now, can I unpack? Thank you. I tried reading this once, and it just didn't make sense. I'm not going to unroll it today. The last time I did, it unfurled for what seemed miles, and it took me days to roll it up again. Now, what was written on it? Oh, yeah. First, there was the Royal Proclamation, which recognized our right to enjoy our freedom on the land undisturbed. Then there were the numbered treaties, which my ancestors signed with the understanding that we were being recognized as a sovereign nation. But they didn't recognize the actual words written. Sneaky words like yield, cede, release, and surrender. Then I started reading what I realized was the Indian Act. It totally contradicted the spirit and intent of what my ancestors understood to be written before, and it became a legal way to regulate our lives. We were placed on reserves, sent to residential schools, and we had to get permission from the Indian agent. Permission to leave the reserve, permission to sell our own grain. We even had to get permission to marry. It sounds like we were prisoners of war to me. We couldn't even vote until the 1960s because we weren't considered citizens. Maybe that's why I've never felt a real connection to the feminist movement. I mean, when women won the right to vote in Canada, my mother's mother was considered a ward of the government. The Indian Act legislated our identity by telling us who an Indian was and who wasn't. For instance, if an Indian woman married a white man, she was no longer an Indian. But if a white woman married an Indian man, she became an Indian. Thank God for those strong Mohawk women who walked all the way to an international court to present our dilemma. And the world said, "Shame on you, Canada." So Canada passed Bill C-31, reinstating our lost status, but only to a degree. So how does it go again? Okay, a woman born 100% Indian marries a white man, becomes 0%, but after 1985, she can apply to become an Indian again, but only 25%. I remember getting a letter from Indian Affairs telling me that I was 12.5% blood quantum Indian. The funny thing is, I don't recall my blood being measured. How do you do that anyway? Talk about your identity crisis. Don't be fooled. This looks light, but it's actually very heavy, and I'd rather not carry it around anymore. Whenever I'm walking, I hear this jingling. It follows me wherever I go. It feels like I'm being haunted. But I'm sure it's coming from this backpack. That's weird. I'm carrying around these keys, and I don't even know what doors they open. Oh yeah, the doors to the residential school. My mom went to residential school. She said that the nuns would wear keys at their waist, and you could always hear them coming. When I was a little girl, my mom told me lots of stories about nuns. funny nuns, kind nuns, and cruel nuns. Over time, I forgot the memories of the nice nuns and the funny nuns, and it was the impression of the mean nuns that stayed in my mind and played out like a scary movie. I used to have nightmares. I'll tell you a story. Once there was this woman who wore black and a white cross that would glow as she walked empty, mournful halls at night. Steps resounding against smooth, dark floor, stripped and polished by small brown hands. Each step threatened as each drew near to incite child fear. In the name of Jesus, so dear. She taught her pupils to turn the other cheek so that it too may feel the sting of denigration. Slaps resounding against smooth, dark cheek, imprinted indelibly by cold, white hand. When I look in the mirror, I can see that handprint, but it's fading. Sometimes I see it on the faces of our children, and I want to cry. But learning about the residential schools helped me to understand my community, my family, but most of all myself. When I learned about it, I wanted to hear other stories. I read this book once. I wonder... Yep. Still here. Kiss of the Fur Queen by Thompson Highway. This book was really hard to read. It's about two brothers in residential school. And although the older tried to protect the younger, he eventually witnessed his abuse. And this is what happened inside of him. Jeremiah opened his mouth and moved his tongue, but his throat went dry. No sound came except a ringing in his ears. Had this really happened before, or had it not? But some chamber deep inside his mind slammed, permanently shut. It had happened to nobody. He had not seen what he was seeing. The next day in church, the brothers dutifully recited, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. The Okamasis brothers had never discussed this phrase, but both had concluded that they were being asked to apologize for something beyond their control. Under these circumstances, however, yards enclosed by steel fences, sleeping quarters patrolled nightly by priests and brothers, they had also independently concluded that it was best to accept the blame. It was their most grievous fault. My poor uncle. My uncle went to residential school. He said he didn't know he was Indian until he got there and was called Savage. When I was a little girl, he used to make me laugh. He sang me songs. He taught me how to dance. He was only happy when he was drunk. But I didn't care. I was so proud of him. But when I was a teenager, I saw him downtown, lying in the gutter. And I was so embarrassed that I pretended I didn't know him. And I walked straight past. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him hang his head. He was ashamed. But not as ashamed as I was. When I realized what I had done, You see, for a moment, I forgot who he was. And I saw him as a drunk, a lost cause. Toxic waste shows on face. Earthly substance abuse. Synapses snapped. Thought for sure the cores burnt. Fell into the crack of this street called society. Thought for sure the soul's lost. Left behind on that street called Skid Row. Left behind like a little child waiting outside the bar. I thought he was a hopeless case, till I saw the light of God upon his face. Don't laugh at the brother in the gutter. He's someone's child, friend, lover. My uncle is a sun dancer now, and I am so proud of him. I was with him when he listened to Harper apologize. We were sitting in his kitchen, listening to the radio and drinking tea with his friends, when suddenly Harper's voice came on the radio, and his words crossed the room and entered the hearts of my uncle and his friends, and they began to weep. And then they began to grieve, and I felt like I was at a funeral. My uncle cried for 3 days. He said he was crying for his little brother who never got to hear the apology. Now I always carry a pack of smokes with me to give to all my relations on the streets, and I'm never ashamed. Oh, it's my little Cousin Smitten. I used to tell him the story about the kittens who lost their mittens, and he was so careful not to lose a mitten. He was only 3 years old when he was scooped up in the 60s, along with all the other little Indian babies. Child welfare said my auntie couldn't protect him, but I could. Even though they said I was a minor, I was taking care of him. In our way, he was my little baby brother. The day they took him away was one of the darkest days of my life. It was cold and stormy outside, and my mom and my auntie locked themselves in the bedroom, and they were crying, and my little cousin didn't know what was going on, so I told him he was going for a ride. I was dressing him for the cold, and they took him away before I could get his second mitten on. I was standing there, shell-shocked, when I realized I was still holding it. So I ran out into the snow in my socks, chasing after the car, yelling, "He needs his mitten! He never wanted to lose." I've had cold feet ever since. We haven't heard from him, but we're still waiting. I'm hoping that he has a good life, a nice family. Sometimes I look for his face in the crowd. The night before they took him away, my auntie asked me to make her some tea. We sat down at the table in the kitchen, and she started crying. She was ashamed. She said, "My girl, I only started drinking to feel normal. After I left the school, I felt so low. I felt like I wasn't worthy of God's love. And the only way I could feel normal was to have a drink. Suddenly, I could do things that other people could do. I could laugh, go out, be personable. But now, my girl, it's got a hold on me. And I tried not to drink when I had my baby. I asked my mom, I asked my dad, I asked my cousins to please stop me if you see me. But the wave was too strong, and I didn't stop soon enough. And now my baby is going to be raised by someone else. She said that maybe it might be a good thing overall, that he's going to need more than she can provide. But her heart was broken. This is my auntie's medicine pouch. She was supposed to wear it for protection. It contains sacred plants that protect you. But she left it behind when she took off. You see, she never got over losing her baby. She just started drinking more than she ever did in her whole life, numbing out her excruciating pain. Till one day, she just up and left for Vancouver. My mom begged her to stay. She said, "An Indian goes to Vancouver on a bus and comes back in a box. Please, stay." But she left anyway. She was so hurt, she couldn't take all the memories. And we never saw her face again. Well, that is, until I saw her picture on a website that lists the names of the murdered and missing Aboriginal women in Canada. Too many to count. It's so strange to live in a country where you know your life isn't counted as much as others. We have to fight that much more for a sense of self-worth, and then we have to convince our young women of theirs. And still, they're finding our daughters, mothers, cousins, aunties, grandmothers murdered on that highway of tears that stretches all the way across Canada. Our prayers are with you, Auntie. We're still waiting. This ribbon is from a funeral wreath. It represents the loss that happens in our communities. Loss that happens with such frequency and intensity that sometimes we don't have time to recover in between funerals. And we're dying too young from diseases of civilization, like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, addictions, domestic violence, and suicide. My nephew was only 20 years old when he ended his life in the basement. No one had a clue. He was the last person anyone would suspect of suicide. Within 2 weeks of his funeral, his best friend ended his life in a basement. And not too long ago, we buried my little niece, who ended her life in a basement. Teepees don't have basements. So many of our youth are choosing to end their lives, and we're still trying to figure out why. My mom said that as a youth living on the reserve, she used to stand on the train tracks and look all the way down and realize that they led to nowhere, and she would feel hopeless, and she would pray to die. Since that time, other youth have stood on those same tracks, feeling hopeless, waiting for the train. Train tracks remind me of the self-harm scars I saw on the arm of a 14-year-old girl who didn't want to live. A young woman from Sutina told me that Aboriginal youth suicide is like a flock of penguins diving into the deep blue, only they don't resurface. I took this ribbon from a funeral wreath to remind me of the pain of loss, but that life is precious. We honor the lives of those that we loved and who left us. We gather, we share our food, we share our stories, we share our tears, but most of all, we share our laughter. Whenever you see a group of Indians together, you will hear laughter. It's one of the ways we've survived. We may have many losses, but we haven't lost our sense of humor. My sweetgrass. I've been looking for this. I've been needing it. And all this time, I've been carrying it with me. When I smell it, it takes me back to when I was a little girl, during Sundance, when my grandma would take me into her tent and tell me stories. The last time I saw my grandma, she wanted me to tell her a story. She said, "Tell me a funny story. I'm tired of all this drama." So I thought about it, and I told her this story. Once, when my mom was a teenager in residential school, she stood at the dorm windows with her best friends. They were watching and waiting for the priest to return from town in his tiny, shiny, black Volkswagen Beetle. When he finally pulled in and parked and walked away, they ran down the fire escape stairs, ran to that tiny, shiny, black Volkswagen Beetle, and together they picked it up and hid it in the bushes. My grandma laughed and laughed. I told my counselor that story. She said it was a secondary measure in the face of oppression. I just call it funny. The sweetgrass can dispel my anxiety just by lighting the end and smudging with the smoke. I am comforted and I can find my good humor again. The sweetgrass is a promise that healing is at hand and that we are all related, no matter what nation, no matter what religion. Well, that's all that's in there. I guess I better pack up. I'm going to need this. And I need this for protection. And the ribbon and the mitten are close to my heart. There are still doors that I need to open. And I'm going to leave this book out for someone else to read so that they can understand what happened in residential school. Just don't read it before you go to sleep. And when you're finished, say a prayer. And I definitely don't need this. I feel so much better. My load, so much lighter. I think I can carry on another day. Your kindness is very healing, even though you may not see it right away. I met this shining woman once who told me that on her journey of darkness, she was given many offerings, which were thought to be ignored, but in fact were stored as pine cones of kindness in a basket woven with pain that she spilled out at the moment she gave life. Because she was given life, she received those offerings and began her journey of light. Thank you for caring. Geramatsin. I will see you again.
Well, thank you, Charlene. That was the second time I've seen that presentation and the first time I've seen it live, and it was definitely worth waiting for. I'm sure everyone would agree. Just to close up the session, before we address questions, just to let you know that evaluations will be mailed to participants within the next 2 business days, so please be sure to sign the attendance sheet, and your feedback for this session is very important to us. So do you address any questions or comments at this point? There's none yet? Sure, yeah. I recall that in the room where I saw this session before, there was a lot of feeling and emotion in the room afterwards. So if you're with some people today, it's sometimes helpful to just debrief with the people in the room, turn and share your impressions and your thoughts about the presentation that Charlene gave and has given so many times and helped so many people to better understand this perspective, for sure. So thank you to everyone who joined us for the final presentation in the 2013-2014 FASD Learning Series. Next year's series will begin on September 17th, 2014. Dr. Sonia Vellet will present on FASD and attachment. The full schedule will soon be available on the FASD Alberta website, fasd.alberta.ca. Thank you again for your continued participation and have a wonderful summer. And thank you again, Charlene, so much.